Hey everyone, What If Fan here, bringing you another exciting part of What If Transmigrated as Minato Namikaze. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name on my Patreon page. Make sure to check it out and show them some love. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 341, Going to the Dragon Clan. Third person POV. Yuzushiovikure, the floating island, 42. Despite the still strange atmosphere among the girls early in the morning, especially Tsuna, who was still walking around embarrassed knowing that they knew what had happened, and also with Kushina and Minato disappearing with her in the middle of the night to go somewhere private, Minato reacted normally with each of them. No, he appeared bolder, giving each of them a kiss, wanting them to get used to the family dynamic they would soon have. After all, the wedding would happen in a month. In any case, Minato went to the clan leader's house, while his granddaughter, Asuma, greeted him at the entrance. Minato ignored the look she had since they first met and followed her inside to speak with her grandfather. Grandpa said you're studying all the clan's fuinjutsu, even those that are nothing more than discarded attempts at creating new seals, she said with a spark of expectation and curiosity toward Minato as they walked through the mansion's hallways. Minato nodded. Yes, that's true. I was curious about them, and there are certainly some very interesting things in that place that I might be able to use. He answered in a modest tone, not seeming interested in her, but also not wanting to be rude to the Uzumaki clan leader's granddaughter. If you want, I can help. I'm very good at fuinjutsu, she offered with some expectation. I'll keep that in mind. Minato merely nodded, not talking much as they entered the room where her grandfather waited. In any case, she left them, closing the door behind Minato, and he knelt on the futon in front of Masaki, while the tea was still hot on the small table. Help yourself, Lord Minato, said Masaki, also kneeling on the other side, as they began a small meeting discussing some things about the floating island. So, I checked the island and people don't seem dissatisfied living in the sky in the nearly 2 weeks that have passed, Minato commented in the middle of the conversation. He had probed the island with observation haki to check the clan's emotions. People did not seem particularly sad or frustrated. In fact, they were living their normal routine, some still sad over their dead relatives, obviously, but none in particular because they were living in the sky. Agriculture was still functioning even at that altitude, and the clan's non-combatants had returned to tending their small farms, since the island was practically self-sustaining, even with some crops partially destroyed by the battle, for the nearly 4,000 members after losing more than 1,000 Uzumaki combatants in the war. Unfortunately, there was no way to save everyone in the forefront war, but by comparison, more than 16,000 enemy ninjas had perished in the battle. All the nations now had a huge hole in their military forces. And despite the sadness still present in many grieving people, life in the Uzumaki clan continued. The children returned to school, the ninjas trained, seeming more determined after that fight, something that Minato and his girls had also felt, particularly a desire to further increase their abilities. The Uzumaki are perfectly fine with the current arrangements, even though many are still used to activities at sea. The landscape here in the sky is not particularly bad. The barrier lady Kushina adapted the island as if it were still at sea level, Masaki said. Minato did not fail to notice how he referred to Kushina as Lady Kushina after the battle. Something that everyone also adored, in particular now treating her as a superior, adding Sama after her name. Even the clan leader himself treated her with respect. It wasn't something anyone should be surprised about. Kushina not only demonstrated her power in fuinjutsu, able to create seals and barriers that would take years and hundreds, perhaps thousands of Uzumaki to complete, she could make them in a few hours alone thanks to Kurama's chakra, but she also demonstrated a combat power that shocked the entire ninja world. Even all the Uzumaki together, in a fight against her, would not come out victorious, for she was more powerful than the entire clan at present. After all, she was already a master in fuinjutsu. For her, dealing with the adamantine chains and seals attempting to prevent the Bija chakra inside her from manifesting would be no problem at all. Not only was she treated like this, but all his girls were also treated the same way, for all of them demonstrated superior combat to the Uzumaki themselves, while also being linked to their main savior as future wives. "I heard you're leaving the island today," Masaki asked Minato. Minato nodded with a serious look. "I'm summoning Guren to do maintenance on the clouds that make the island fly. And I intend to go to the Dragon Clan right afterward." The man nodded. "I admit, it's still hard to believe I saw a real dragon in my life. Even harder when his power is enough to make the entire land of whirlpools fly. I've never seen a beast like that," the elder murmured. "I wouldn't say that to his face if I were you." "Dragons are very proud creatures and get offended easily," Minato warned. "Of course, Lord Minato, I had no intention of offending him. But still. I heard rumors that you knew the dragon before he transformed into the powerful creature capable of lifting our country as if it were nothing," the man murmured, further emphasizing the feat that had kept them in the sky for 12 days. Minato gave a small nostalgic smile. "It's true. He was a fish, and I found him by accident when he was just a fish wandering through the sea. He wanted to explore the world to grow stronger at the time, and he found me on the southern coast of the Land of Fire while I was training my powers away from the malicious eyes inside Konoha. Since then, we trained together." The man raised an eyebrow. "You trained with a fish? That is particularly strange," Masaki murmured, laughing. Minato merely nodded. "Yeah. Although it's not very common for a fish with horns who can speak the language. But he seemed quite enthusiastic at the time, not afraid of me or my powers, training Tankes Jutsu. Since then, we've trained together. Once, I threw him on top of a bunch of enemies using the Hiration seal to appear in the enemy camp while everyone was distracted by the fish screaming." Minato didn't fail to comment, remembering that time when he found Suna's camp entering the Land of Fire, before discovering their plan was to capture the Fire Daimyo. His strategy was to confuse the enemy while placing a seal on Guren's body and throwing him directly at them. "Well, I hope he doesn't remember that at this moment," the man joked. Minato agreed, still nodding. "Guren isn't one to hold grudges. Not that he could really do anything against me, even now. But we were friends. My bonds with him are stronger than any other summoning contract. Even though I really like the toads of Mount Mayaboku, I don't have as strong an affinity with them as I have with Guren. After all, we've been friends for years." In any case, they continued talking a bit. Minato, in the end, left the clan leader and disappeared directly with the Hiration, appearing in one of the corners where he had his seals used specifically to summon Guren. Minato stood at the edge of a cliff. If one could even call it that, after all, everything he saw below were clouds and the blue of the sea 10,000 meters beneath the clouds. He was at one of the island's farthest points, which led straight into the void in the middle of the sky. He didn't fail to look with a certain admiration. Currently, the island was hiding in a mass of clouds surrounding it, preventing even curious eyes from finding it while it was still near the elemental nations, though farther south over the sea. Minato was particularly satisfied with this. They were isolated, and he himself had searched for any sign of Zetsus since the first day, but there was nothing. He didn't know what Madara would do after they had saved the Uzumaki clan, but he certainly wouldn't be as passive as he had been until now. Minato needed to be careful. He still had those two old academy companions of his, with Minato having stolen a pair of those eyes and given them to Makoto. However, that might not stop the Uchiha from developing a new Mangekyo, and if they created a pair of eternal Mangekyo, it would be a bit problematic. In any case, Minato simply shone and his body flew in a straight line like a laser, leaving the barrier as the wind quickly struck him. Stopping in the middle of the sky, he cut his finger and began forming the seals before invoking the summoning jutsu. In the middle of the clouds, an explosion appeared, and Guren emerged. The blue dragon taking shape before Minato, who was standing on his nose, with the enormous draconic eyes fixed on him. "Minato," Guren said without needing to move his mouth, simply keeping it open as he spoke. "Hello, Guren. Can you adjust the clouds surrounding the island?" Minato asked. Guren nodded, relaxing as he began the work, summoning his yellow clouds and quickly placing them beneath the island, replacing the old ones that were already beginning to weaken. Every 3 days, Guren was summoned for that task, and, particularly, the dragon was not irritated by it. He hadn't changed much in personality, although now more prideful. Minato had to admit he was still always willing to help Minato, just as Minato had once helped him. The clan members always looked at the dragon circling the island with eyes full of admiration, seeing him every 3 days.
"Are you ready to go?" Guren asked when he finished. Minato nodded.
"Yes." "Then please, enter my mouth," the dragon requested.
Minato nodded and flew toward Guren's teeth, which opened for him to enter. As soon as Minato passed through, the mouth closed. What has Guren been eating? This is horrible. Minato murmured quietly as he felt the stench of the dragon's breath. Not that he could complain. Dragons don't brush their teeth, right?
In the next moment, everything lurched, and Minato knew Guren had cancelled his summoning on his own, returning to the land of dragons. 3 days ago, Minato had received Guren's answer regarding his request to visit the land of dragons and even train his techniques there. When Guren opened his mouth again, Minato stepped out and immediately found himself facing the legendary land of dragons, practically on the other side of the world relative to the elemental nations. He saw a place not on land, but in the sky, full of floating islands at least 10,000 meters high. The dragons themselves placed them there to make their nests and establish their clan. It was no wonder dragons were extremely rare to encounter. No one knew of the fish clan unless they happened to meet one by chance. Even less the dragon clan, which lived in the middle of the sky. Minato looked at each of the islands. He could see dragons flying above, some others sleeping, some in pairs. Minato quickly activated his observation haki and scanned the entire area. There were at least 40 dragons, some 100 meters long, others up to 300 meters, but there was one in particular, 500 meters long, on the highest island. Minato knew that the dragon clan was a bit exotic. In fact, they had their own offspring created through the obvious fertilization of a female or male. When the female was about to give birth, they flew to the waterfall of trial of the fish clan and released their eggs into the sea so that new fish could be born. Later, the small fish were taken in by the clan, growing with the hope of passing the waterfall trial, which was extremely difficult. There were at least 400 fish in the clan, but only 40 dragons. And Minato suspected that dragons lived much longer than the fish. Just like in Guren's case. He had passed the waterfall trial, transforming into a dragon and coming here, completely cutting ties with the fish clan. It was quite a strange cycle, but it worked for the dragons. The dragons, in particular, did not seem to care much for their offspring, only expecting them to be worthy so that, years later, they could become blue dragons. Just as Guren should have his father and mother here, he was only recognized after becoming a dragon. That was the cycle of the dragon clan. In any case, on the highest island, a particular dragon, black in color, with a white beard, was resting when he felt something. Someone was probing not only him but the entire region. His eyes opened, and his red tone began to glow. How interesting, who was trying to spy on the dragon clan? Could it be that human for whom Guren had requested permission? Is he already trying to observe us without our permission? Interesting, he murmured in a fierce tone. Chapter 342. Knowing the Dragon Clan. Third-person POV. Dragon Clan, 42. Guren headed toward the higher islands with Minato already above his head, and he had already noticed eyes beyond those dragons above him, something coming from the island they were heading to. This happened after he probed, sensing that the other party knew he was scanning all the dragons, becoming surprised by that. The dragons around them began to stare with curiosity, but that was nothing surprising. It was obvious that Minato had been seen by them. Guren said that any strange scent that wasn't from the dragons was quickly perceived and noticed by the others. Thus, Guren and Minato advanced toward the island where the elder lived without anyone disturbing them. As soon as they arrived, they saw the enormous dragon lying between a forest, sunbathing and sleeping until they arrived. Despite being much larger than any tree there, the tallest trees did not reach even 1/3 of its lying body. The island was quite large, at least around 12 square kilometers. As they approached, the dragon lifted its gaze toward them with a glimmer of interest. "Guren, you have finally returned.
And with the human who requested permission to enter the areas of our clan, said the dragon, its voice echoing as ancient as the earth. Minato could sense, through observation haki, that he was truly ancient, at least as old as the elder toad of Mount Mayaboku.
Its eyes seemed to catch something from Minato when he looked at him again. "Are you probing me again, boy?" said the dragon to Minato, as if it were something amusing to say. Minato blinked in surprise again. Not even the Zetsus or any sensory ninja could detect his observation haki, but the creature before him had clearly done so, and it was the second time. "It's rude to pry into others, you know," the dragon began. "But I would like to know what you discovered," he said, while Buren also looked surprised. Minato nodded calmly. "I noticed a gaze on me ever since I arrived, but you truly paid attention when I researched the place and its inhabitants. You seem to be the only one who noticed me checking your clan. I also sensed that you are quite ancient, 1,000 years, but my perception is being blocked and I can't get much more information. I can't say I know much about you. However, you are very powerful, more powerful than the Kage category among humans," Minato said. Using observation haki on him was like probing Kurama itself or any other Biju. His current haki couldn't identify many things in those creatures. This dragon was in the same category, perhaps even more powerful than most of them. The dragon nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. "Well, it seems you didn't bring just anyone here, Durin." "That is good." "Yes, father," Durin answered. Minato blinked and looked at Durin. "Father? He is my father. He recognized me as soon as I entered the dragon's territory. I was introduced directly to him. He said I was his biological son. I also met Mom, but Dad likes to stay here alone, sleeping," Durin said. Minato merely nodded. The dragon looked at that and let out a laugh. "That is true. I was surprised that my son managed to pass through the waterfall. He is worthy of carrying my lineage," said the dragon, showing a smile. "Wait. But you're about 1,000 years old," Minato murmured. The dragon did not seem offended. "The older dragons are, the more powerful they become, human. Do not place us within your standards. Each dragon becomes powerful as time passes. It is good to remember that," he said, with a more dangerous tone, though it was only a warning. Minato nodded a second time in silence, not wanting to say much about it. "Durin is the son of my 6th wife. Dragons usually live from 200 to 400 years. I have already had 7 children who became dragons, but in the last 300 years, I was unable to have any, and all of Durin's siblings died centuries ago. Now Durin has appeared, and I admit he is the most powerful son I have ever had. My wife is very proud, with her son being the first to pass the test among the eggs she released into the sea. She spoils him all the time, even personally insisted on letting him bring you here, since it was Durin's request. And here we are," he said, while Minato listened, surprised by Durin's family background. "You also seem to be an interesting human. I know you helped my son. He told me about his journey to become strong when he left the Fish Clan and traveled across the sea. He said he met a human, a very powerful human, stronger than any other he encountered. Is that true?" "You could say yes," Minato said in a modest tone, but he was also above the Kage category. There was no one in the world who could truly stop him at the moment, not even Madara. "Great. And what do you plan to seek here in the Dragon Clan?" the dragon asked with a glimmer of interest, while Durin stood beside Minato. "What I seek is your sage mode," Minato said, and the dragon did not seem surprised by the answer. "You know that mastering natural energy is not something easy and will bring death to the vast majority of humans. Are you sure that is what you want?" he asked. Minato looked at Durin, surprised. "You didn't tell him," he asked. After all, Minato had already mastered a sage mode. "Oh, that's right. He already possesses the sage mode of the Toad Clan. Remember when I was leaving a few times last week? Sometimes Minato summoned me to train at Mount Mayaboku." The Toad Clan, the Black Dragon murmured in surprise before looking at Minato. "I heard that you managed to pass the waterfall." That is why I gave you permission to come here and why I am inclined to help you, knowing that you had already come into contact with natural energy in the waterfall challenge. And that is not easy even for the fish who descend from us, for they have bodies made for natural energy, and even so, few pass the waterfall. I was already surprised that you also passed the challenge. I did not know you had already mastered Sage Mode, he said. Actually, it was thanks to that challenge at the waterfall that I gained much more ease with the Sage Mode of Mount Myaboku. I was trained by the toads, and after that, it became certainly easy, Minato said, while the dragon nodded, satisfied. The waterfall challenge consisted of reaching its top, but the higher you climbed, the more natural energy pushed you downward and the stronger the pressure became. Minato managed to climb the 1,000 meters. The fish end up absorbing the natural energy, which is why, at the end of the waterfall, they transform into dragons, an extremely difficult achievement to obtain. Well, that is already a good start. It makes things much easier. But still, do not think it will be easy, he declared before pausing. My name is Carrion, I am the oldest dragon of the clan and the one who rules over the others. He finally introduced himself. Minato Namikaze, leader of the Namikaze clan. Minato gave his introduction, even though he was the only member, officially. I want you to at least spend one night here in the clan. Tomorrow we will see how you will handle yourself. We will go to the Island of Lightning to begin the training, he said, while Buren turned to Minato to explain. The Island of Chaos is where we train the Sage Mode. I always go there to train. The dragons have said that I am very talented and that I may follow in my father's footsteps. Ah, the name is Chaos because the island is full of storms bursting with natural energies, like lightning rains and hurricanes. You have to stay in the middle of that chaos and try to absorb the natural energy. You'll have fun, Buren said confidently. Minato raised an eyebrow. That did not sound exactly fun, but he merely nodded. I understand, he said, and they soon said goodbye to the elder. Go introduce him to your mother. Tell her that my father will be having dinner at home today, said the elder. Buren spoke as Minato remained on the dragon's head, traveling between the islands until they reached a volcanic island over 5 kilometers wide. They approached and found 3 dragons with more feminine coloration lying in the hot springs. When they noticed the approach, they lifted their heads with curious looks. Minato found the scene very strange, seeing female dragons enjoying themselves as humans did in hot springs. As soon as the baby blue dragoness saw her son approaching, the other dragons also looked surprised, but she was the first to react. Buren, you are here, my son, she said with a joyful expression. Dragons only recognized their children when they became dragons, and Buren was her first after 100 years of life. How could she not spoil him? Minato could see her navy blue coloration, which made Buren's dark blue coloring a fusion between his mother's baby blue and his father's black, with his mother's pigmentation favored more strongly in him than his father's. Hello, mother. This is Minato Namikaze, he said, smiling. Hello, my son's friend. My name is Serenia. Well, you seem to be quite a capable human from what he told me, she said. It is a pleasure to meet you. Buren has been a good friend for years. Mother, father said he will have dinner today and invited Minato as well. I understand. In any case, take him for a walk. Return home at the end of the day. I will prepare a delicious dinner, she said, while Minato had a bad feeling about it. Either way, Buren acted enthusiastically. He introduced the islands and even some dragons who stared at Minato with interest. Even a red dragon who had been at the waterfall trial when Buren passed approached them. Hey, you're the human from that day at the waterfall, aren't you? How did a human come here? How about proving your strength? Let me see whether you are worthy or not, he announced. Hey, wait, Professor Ignaros. Minato was invited. Minato is not here for any fight. Buren tried to intervene, but the dragon seemed quite stubborn. Ignaros had been Buren's teacher ever since he joined the Dragon Clan. But he was very proud and bold. No. He has to prove his strength. A human is not worthy of being here. Passing the waterfall is one thing, but a creature that cannot fly walking through the dragon clan is an insult. Remember, Durin, a dragon that cannot fly is not a dragon, he declared.
Who said I cannot fly?
Minato said, beginning to levitate above Durin's head. The red dragon blinked, surprised. Well, that already improves things, he muttered.
Now let us see if you are strong. You may strike me however you like. Use those human tricks of yours that can generate the elementals.
I do not care, he said with arrogance.
Durin looked worried, but Minato faced him for a few seconds with a calm gaze and nodded. He vanished in an instant.
In the next moment, he appeared beside the dragon using light, closing his hand with his fist coated in haki, and struck his cheek. The dragon barely had time to perceive the danger, he only felt his face being crushed before flying away with a groan of pain. Durin watched in shock and worry as he saw his teacher fall downward before recovering, managing to escape unconsciousness, his lips bleeding and his eyes staring in shock at the human.
What was that?
He murmured before narrowing his eyes.
You acted well, human.
I must say I underestimated you, but it will not be so easy next time.
So come at me with everything, the red dragon announced. Durin could only watch Minato disappear in advance once more.
Minato had fought with Durin before, and the blue dragon knew how dangerous the human was even in his own dragon form. His friend was stronger. Minato and this Ignaros began fighting in the middle of the sky, while all the dragons started to witness explosions, with the red dragon launching attacks at Minato, who dodged and punched him using only his blackened fists. Hours passed, and Minato now found himself near a volcano while the ancient black dragon laughed beside his wife.
Durin was beside Minato, curled up in a corner.
Minato scratched his head, looking worried at the food, a pile of animals the dragoness had simply roasted by spitting fire at them. Not that there wasn't edible food, but that method of preparation made the meal worse than those larvae the Toad Chief used to offer him.
Ha ha!
You really got that, Ignaros, I admit, Carrion said, satisfied to hear the story of how the fight that caught the clan's attention that afternoon had unfolded.
Father! Don't say something like that about the professor.
But he was foolish, Durin, replied the ancient dragon. He was the one who challenged your human friend, and look how that turned out.
He was beaten. But I am also surprised. I didn't expect a human to be stronger than a dragon. And he wasn't even using Sage Mode. Those blows you landed on him were anything but normal.
I have never seen anything like that, and that certainly wasn't chakra, said the dragon, looking at Minato with clear interest in his haki abilities. Yeah, some of the unique abilities I possess. I was lucky to receive them, Minato answered once again in a modest tone, while taking out a lunchbox after giving the excuse that it was his grandmother's last wish that he should eat her special recipe every night. Durin found that absurd. He knew Minato had never had a grandmother. He was only saying it to fool the dragon parents, but Durin's mother began to cry and said it was all right. Either way, they spent the night talking. When the day arrived, they headed toward an island far above the others, surrounded by dark clouds and every kind of chaos they could produce. Minato's breathing was so thin that they had to carry him manually, for they were in the thermosphere of the planet, over 100,000 meters above sea level. Durin and his father, together, flew with Minato on top of the blue dragon's head, heading toward the island. Minato could not help but look excited. He would finally train the dragon's Sage Mode, believing it to be far more powerful than the Toad's. Chapter 343, Draconic Form. Third-person POV. Dragon Clan, 42. The lightning danced across the island while the hurricanes flung anything in their path. The place was complete chaos. A 50-square-kilometer island entirely surrounded by hurricanes, lightning, and rain. Durin glided through the air as he stared at the island from a distance with a sharp gaze, trying to see something within it. At its center was Minato, sitting in the middle of all that chaos in the lotus position, focused even as the world collapsed around him, a true apocalypse surrounding him. Which already demonstrated the strong concentration Minato possessed, something anyone else would be unable to maintain. It was a far more rigorous training than what he had done on Mount Myaboku, where the only thing he needed to do was focus with the calm energy of nature, very different from this one, 1,000 times more chaotic. If on Mount Myaboku birds perched on his shoulder as he harmonized with nature, here lightning struck him with fatal violence. And perhaps that was why no human had ever truly mastered natural energy in the Dragon Sage mode. No one could withstand the electrical discharge constantly hitting their bodies. Minato had his Logia fruit, which made his body recover quickly from any thunder that struck him without injuring him, while any possible wound turned into light, regenerating a moment later. Guren remained there observing Minato from a distance with his draconic eyes, watching his old friend as he had for the past 30 days. Since Minato had begun the training, he had left only once. On the same day Guren's father explained how the process of attaining the Dragon Sage mode on that island would work. Minato left only to notify his fiancées that he would spend a month within the Dragon Clan. Guren watched him in that state for days, always coming to the island to see how Minato was doing. Minato did not leave his position for 4 weeks, remaining there without eating, drinking, or sleeping, focused since the moment he had arrived. He had explained how he would conduct the process to master that natural energy. It would be slow, because that energy was far more chaotic than what he was used to. He would need to intensify the natural energy he already controlled to get close to the level the island provided, about 100 times greater than the waterfall test of the Fish Clan. Should I call him? Murmured Guren, thinking about it as he saw Minato still unmoving. He remembered when he had brought Minato back to the Dragon Clan. He had been summoned by Kushina in Yuzushiogakure, shouting for him to return on the 30th day. Guren had a determined glint in his eyes and rushed toward the island without hesitation the next moment. The lightning struck Guren as he entered the area, but as a dragon, his skin was one of the strongest in the world. That was nothing. He advanced without caring about being struck by lightning, already used to it from training on that same island. Dragons always make an agreement when they train Sage mode in natural energy. They usually stay on the island as long as they can. No one could remove them from it while they were training. Guren could remain for an entire week, but being struck by lightning every minute for 7 straight days was still too much for him, and he couldn't endure much more than that. His father said he could withstand up to 6 months of the sky's attacks, and Minato had certainly surpassed all expectations by enduring the entire first month. And Guren was only going to call him because Kushina had asked him not to extend the time too much, which was why Guren had come to summon him back. Minato moved his eyelids as he sensed Guren's presence approaching. A bolt of lightning had just struck him, leaving his body marked by several sparks and glowing yellow injuries of light, but no real damage. His eyes finally opened and turned toward his companion, who was also receiving some attacks as he drew near. Minato, you've been here for 30 days. Don't forget, your wedding is tomorrow. Kushina asked me to remind you, Guren said with an apologetic tone. Minato raised an eyebrow, actually remembering that. Guren was somewhat attached to Kushina. Even when he was a fish, he had already known her and Mito back then. Any request from the girl, he fulfilled without resistance. Minato stared at him as his eyes glowed an intense yellow, making Guren look at him in surprise. I see. Minato murmured, standing up as another bolt struck him. His eyes didn't even flicker at the impact. He looked at his own hands, closing and opening his fingers, feeling the natural energy. It's been a month, so I can already feel a bit of the power, Minato murmured. He possessed something no one else in the ninja world had, something no one had ever achieved before. He was incredibly excited about it, yet also surprised. He realized a month had passed and he hadn't even noticed. He hadn't eaten, drunk, or done anything besides remaining there focused, his body getting closer and closer to mastering the chaotic natural energy of that place. Well, let's go then, Minato said, simply flashing into light before reappearing above Guren's head. His yellow eyes were beginning to return to their normal blue, but still held a certain glow of power. Are you all right, Minato? Guren asked, looking at the human sitting on his nose. I am. Just a bit dizzy, he said, while his stomach growled. And also very hungry. He laughed and patted his stomach. If you want, I can ask my mom to prepare something, Guren suggested. Minato quickly shook his head at the idea. Surely Guren's mother's cooking wasn't more pleasant than the larvae served by Shima. No, I'll eat at the Uzumaki clan. Let's get out of here first. Durin only nodded, beginning to move away, still being struck by several bolts of lightning and passing through a few hurricanes that tried to pull in his enormous body. Already accustomed to it, he left that chaos with ease, descending at high speed back toward the islands about 90 kilometers below them. "So you can already enter Sage Mode?" Durin asked, very curious, as they left the island and descended. He didn't really know how a Sage Mode worked for a human, much less the dragons. But if Minato changed only his eyes in Toad Sage Mode, then those yellow eyes he had seen earlier had to mean something, right?
No, Minato clarified. I'm just getting used to the natural energy, but I can try to perform a transformation. So let me test something.
He said this as Durin stopped.
Minato flew out into the open sky, in front of the dragon.
He paused for a moment and closed his eyes, trying for the first time to let the natural energy enter and intensify, feeling it become much more chaotic yet still under his control. Minato had spent a month only absorbing it carefully and letting the energy flow out, as if he were a filter, just to make his body get used to it. The moment he made the chakra of that atmosphere begin to be drawn into him, Minato began to change.
His body transformed as golden scales started covering his arms and chest.
"Horns," Durin murmured upon seeing small points appearing on Minato's forehead, one on each side, curving outward and then pointing forward. His body now looked much more resilient, the scales gave an impression of armor, and his physique began to grow. Minato, who was a little over 1.85 m tall, grew to about 4 meters, transforming into a hybrid dragon form. Even a golden tail emerged from his back.
Minato couldn't help but look surprised.
He had managed to control the transformation very well without losing control, but he knew he couldn't maintain that state for long, as it was his first transformation.
"So?
How do I look?" Minato asked, now with golden eyes again. He resembled the hybrid forms of the Akuma no Mi from One Piece.
"You really look like a dragon human,"
Durin murmured in awe, seeing the hybrid form, quite different from the Toad Sage Mode.
Minato truly looked powerful there.
He felt the power flowing and looked at Durin.
"Durin, I want you to unleash your flame breath."
"I'll try to withstand it using only the physical form of Sage Mode," Minato declared.
"Are you sure, Minato?" Durin asked, looking a bit worried. But seeing his friend's calm expression, he narrowed his eyes and nodded. "All right."
He opened his mouth and quickly began to gather energy, forming a huge fireball before spitting it directly at Minato, making even the sky darken. The energy advanced like a torrent of lightning-shaped flames, covering Minato with its golden scales in the next instant. The explosion echoed through the air, the flames began to fade, and the sunlight returned to shine. Then, a small puff of smoke revealed the place where Minato had been. The smoke vanished, and he reappeared there standing, his body a bit scorched and marked with some burns, but Minato was smiling at Durin as if nothing had happened. "Yeah, that really hurt, but this body is very tough," Minato said with satisfaction, looking at his hands covered in scales. He didn't have draconic hands, they were still human fists, but wrapped in golden scales. He felt like he could do anything, and his eyes shone even brighter.
"Hey, Durin, let's race. I want to see my speed now." "Let's see who gets there faster," Minato declared.
"Hey, wait,"
Durin tried to say, but Minato simply didn't care.
His eyes glowed with determination, his body moved downward and, before Durin could react, Minato flashed and shot through the sky, tearing the air apart and leaving Durin behind. The dragons heard an echo in the sky and saw a small flash, wondering what was happening. The elder, who knew his son was going to fetch Minato, sensed something strange. Before he could process it, something came at extremely high speed and blew up one of the islands below the one he rested on. He lifted his head in surprise, not even he could follow that speed properly. "What was that?" he murmured, while a purple dragon roared, emerging from the island that began to crumble from the impact.
"And what is this?"
"Who dares?" complained the purple dragon, as Minato flew out of the crater he had created, rising into the sky and looking at where he was. And then at the dragon, who now stared at him, stunned.
"Sorry about that.
I was dozens of kilometers above and decided to test my current speed.
I just didn't know I'd get here in an instant. I can't even control it yet."
Did I interrupt your sleep? Minato apologized, while the dragon stared in disbelief at that human in a humanoid dragon form.
So this is the sage mode when a human masters it.
It's incredible. It was at that moment that the elder dragon appeared, approaching Minato, staring at him in surprise and examining his body. Suddenly, Minato began to feel his energy reaching its limit, and the transformation dissolved. His body shrank until it returned to 1.85 m, no longer covered in scales.
Well,
I still need more training, Minato declared in the stunned silence of the dragons, while others began to appear to see him. In any case, he focused again, gathered natural energy, and let it flow, transforming once more in a chaotic surge as he regained his draconic form.
I'll be going, Minato said. Tell Durin that I'll summon him later. I need to find my fiancés before the wedding. Goodbye.
He joined his hands into a seal and disappeared in a flash of light.
Minato, afraid of destroying the house in Yuzushiogakyure, didn't appear directly inside it and landed in the backyard,
which exploded beneath his feet before he could control himself.
The first to appear immediately was Kushina, startled by the explosion, thinking it was an attack.
She stopped in front of Minato before lifting her gaze, and her mouth dropped open as she remained frozen in shock. Before her stood a 4-meter giant covered in scales, a humanoid dragon with horns, golden eyes, and blonde hair. "Who are you?" she simply asked in a way that showed she was more surprised than threatened.
Chapter 344, a wedding that would take place the following day. Third-person POV.
Yuzushiogakyure, the floating island, 42.
Kushina kept staring at Minato transformed in front of her, while he opened a smile. Come on, Kushina.
You can feel my chakra transformed into something more chaotic, but you still know it's me, Minato said simply, looking at his future wife, who was now tiny compared to his current size.
Then tell me what happened to you. Your chakra is strange, yes.
I recognized it, but it still gives me chills. Kushina frowned as she looked at him like that. She ended up crossing her arms, with the posture of the lady of the house scolding the husband who came home late.
She also couldn't help but notice even more changes in his body.
You're too big, too golden, your horns are too big, your eyes changed, and your chakra looks like a storm created inside your body.
What is this? Minato, transform back. I'm not going to marry you in this state.
Go back to normal now, she complained, stomping her foot.
Meanwhile, Makoto appeared, opening the door slightly.
Her belly was a little bigger after a month, and Minato couldn't help but ignore Kushina to look at the child growing in her womb. His draconic senses could even see the child's vitality, making Makoto raise an eyebrow when she saw her Minato standing at 4 meters tall.
You grew, Minato, she murmured. Ai Rikudo, why are you so big? Tsunade also appeared, jumping through the window.
Hanabi was not very far either, running toward their house at that exact moment.
She had been with her grandfather when the explosion caught the attention of the entire clan. She activated the Byakugan and saw, through the walls, the creature standing in the middle of their house's destroyed garden with a type of chakra she had never seen before. Minato could also easily sense her approaching.
Hanabi entered a moment later, passing through the barrier that prevented anyone other than the 5 there and their clan relatives from entering.
Minato just sighed when Hanabi entered the place, looking at him with a grimace, recognizing him more by his face than by his chakra, obviously.
And this is the Dragon Sage mode, as you can see.
But it's still not complete. This is what I turn into when I have enough chakra to enter the Sage mode I learned when I went to the Gyurin clan. Anyway,
he said, while everyone felt the enormous amount of chakra that, at that moment, was comparable to that of a Biju drained from Minato's body. Then, Minato returned to his normal size, and his scales and horns withdrew from his body.
Minato was perfectly normal. Hey, Tsunade, can you fix the garden?
I'm still trying to control the strength in Dragon Sage mode.
I only stepped on it and destroyed it. This is too strong, Minato asked.
Suna looked at him for a moment, until she took steps toward Minato, passing by Kushina and looking directly at him, when she moved her arm back for an instant and attacked him. Minato was fast enough to raise his hand and stop her punch, creating an explosive sound and making the air tremble between the girls. You disappeared for a month, she said, in an accusatory tone. Well, I didn't know how long I would be gone, but I trained a lot and I feel much stronger than before. If I manage to complete this sage mode, I'll be on a level above where I already was, and I'll be able to protect all of you even better, Minato said without taking offense at her attack, which in fact was nothing to him now. Suna stared at him for a few seconds after hearing that, then stepped back, pulling her fist away from Minato's palm, but she soon took a step forward again, not to attack him this time, but to hug him tightly. He was surprised, along with the other three girls. There was no more anger or arrogance in Suna's voice. A month away, Minato. You disappeared for a month, you damn training addict. You have to take responsibility, she said, before Minato finally returned the hug. He smiled at that. Ah, did you miss me? My training ended up being difficult, since I couldn't keep my mind away from you every second, Minato commented, while she buried her face in his chest. He lifted her face and kissed her, with Kushina making a grimace beside them. Suna returned the kiss, despite the embarrassment, since she wasn't used to this kind of affection. Her body moved more naturally and they were sharing a more passionate kiss, not caring about being in front of the others. Minato had taken her virginity a month ago, and she thought about him every day. She wanted to feel his warmth again, wanted to feel alive, just as she had felt connected to him. Now that I'm back, well, I'll spend more time with you, after all we have a honeymoon to enjoy. I'll only need to return to the Dragon Clan to refine my sage mode, but nothing like staying away for so long now. Anyway, how are you all? Minato said. Suna took 2 steps back, and he couldn't even hear her response, because Kushina jumped on him as soon as he was free, grabbing him and kissing him, seeming to compete with Suna. The blonde Senju made a grimace at the sight, Hanabi looked shocked, and Makoto began to laugh softly, watching the interaction around Minato. Kushina attacked him before pulling away. Well, if she can do that, it's my duty as your wife to kiss you too, she declared. To me, you're just jealous. You weren't even in the mood to do something like that. Suna murmured, crossing her arms, not liking Kushina's attitude, while the redhead just looked at her and stuck out her tongue. He's my husband too, don't forget that. Just because you slept with him first doesn't mean he's exclusively yours, Kushina shot back. Minato merely sighed at the female competition in front of him. Where was their unity from a month ago? Now they were fighting among themselves, he thought, scratching his head. Not that he could complain, at least they had their own opinions and personalities. They didn't act like submissive women, which would be a bit boring for him. Despite everything, all a man wants is peace and happiness at home. At the same time, Minato loved all of them and couldn't choose one among the 4, abandoning the others. He was completely selfish, but they had also agreed to form this kind of family. You damn redhead, then stop saying those things when you lock yourself in the bathroom every night and start rubbing yourself. Do you think we don't hear your moans calling Minato's name since he left? Suna said, making Kushina look at Minato completely red. I don't do such a shameful thing, Kushina murmured, but she was clearly lying, her face surpassing the red tone of her hair. Minato saw her hide her face so he wouldn't see it, but the blonde just opened a smile at her. Well, if you honor me in the bathroom, I'm happy to hear that, Minato said, unable to stop imagining the redhead touching herself. It seemed he had left quite a lasting impression that time in the bedroom. Kushina looked irritated, but at the same time, a glimmer of joy appeared when she heard that from Minato. He hadn't praised her directly, but even so she blushed and couldn't look at him, clinging to his chest. You know. I was curious about what it was like. I wanted to feel it down there before we did it, you know, she said shyly. Minato didn't respond immediately, he just smiled. I hope it was pleasant, he said. She couldn't look at him, but still answered the question. Yes, it was very much, when I thought about you, she said, stuttering. While Suna clicked her tongue, Hanabi was completely red listening to such an open conversation about sexuality in the middle of their house's yard, and Makoto was the calmest one. Anyway, how are things? Are we getting married tomorrow? Minato asked, looking at all of them, while Kushina was still clinging to his chest. Yes, Minato. Everything is organized for tomorrow, Makoto said, approaching with a gentle tone.
You didn't even bother organizing anything, Suna murmured, raising an eyebrow. Well, those things aren't my strength, Minato replied simply. He didn't understand anything about weddings, so he had asked the clan leader and even Kushina's mother to organize the ceremony. All right. Let's talk, but first. Minato moved Kushina slightly aside and looked toward a corner of the island, sensing everything with haki. He noticed that the clouds holding the island were weakening. In fact, Guren placed the clouds there every 3 days, but the last time, Minato had asked him to hold them for much longer, due to the period he would stay in the Dragon Clan without knowing how long it would take. Guren used all his energy to summon enough clouds to last a month and a week, but that left the island without any more movement in the sky. Guren himself became so tired that he couldn't do anything else, only placing Minato in his mouth for teleportation after receiving Kushina's notice about the wedding day. Minato talked with them a bit more and disappeared from there, going to another corner of the island to summon Guren, who complained a lot about him actually disappearing after leaving the island of storms more than 100 kilometers out at sea. In any case, all the clouds around the island were renewed, and Minato returned to the village, first meeting the clan leader to inform him that he was back, which was obvious with the blue dragon appearing again, and to ask how the wedding preparations were going. The man informed him that everything was ready, with Minato seeing an area in one corner of the island prepared for the next day. After that, Minato ended up at the house of Kushina's mother, Akahana Uzumaki. You don't seem very nervous for a man who's going to marry 4 women tomorrow, Akahana said while offering him tea in her kitchen, looking at Minato with a motherly smile. Clearly, Minato would also become her son by marrying Kushina. A little, maybe, Minato replied. He couldn't help but think that he was an 18-year-old young man who would soon have 4 wives and would also become a father in the coming months. He was a bit nervous about his new responsibilities, while finally being able to breathe a little now that they were in the middle of the sky with no more wars or schemes. Since returning from the Second War almost 2 years ago, he hadn't truly been able to breathe, but in their current situation, everything seemed much more peaceful, perfect for the new life expectancy he would have. Still, he remained calm. It's a shame that the house I had built in Konoha can't be put to better use, he said, remembering his little corner on the edge of the village, which he had worked so hard to buy and build. He didn't know what the situation of the Namikaze clan property he left behind would be like. Upon leaving Konoha, he might no longer command that land, just like all his ninja supply shops that were in his name after receiving them from the Senju clan years ago, granted by Mito herself long ago. Anyway, I hope you can make my daughter and all her future sisters happy. I will do my best for that, Minato murmured, drinking the tea. And I know you will. They all love you, remember that, Akahana said. I love them all, Minato replied. I know you love them, but I'm sure you have a favorite, she said, making Minato look at her in surprise. Don't look at me like that. We all have a favorite. Even mothers have favorite children, even though it's not right to neglect the others in favor of the one you like the most. Still, there is always one. It must be the same with you. Know that it's fine. Whether it's my daughter or one of the other girls. Just don't show it openly. You know. Treat them all equally. Never fail to give gifts to all of them or to give them your attention and affection. Never stop loving any of them. Love all of them equally. They have already accepted the fact that they can't have you exclusively for themselves, but they expect this from you. She paused before continuing. Being married to one woman isn't easy. Being married to 4 of them, all-powerful kunoichi, is even harder. But as long as you satisfy them physically and emotionally, you'll have a beautiful family, and I'm looking forward to seeing the children you and my daughter will have together, she finished, after her advice. I'm grateful for your words, Lady Akahana, Minato said, in a tone of gratitude. In the end, they talked a bit more, but Minato returned to his house afterward to pick up a small box he had left at Akahana's house, which was the real purpose of that visit. He had asked for something important, while she had looked for the most renowned artisans to obtain the wedding rings, and Akahana had kept them hidden even from Kushina. Minato entered the house after seeing that the backyard had been fixed by Makoto or Hanabi, as they were the only ones with affinity for the earth element. Minato couldn't help but look at the 4 pairs of eyes staring at him while they were sitting in the kitchen waiting for him. He formed a smile, his stomach growling. He really wanted to eat, but first he would have to deal with them. And so he did, as they talked under the expectation of the following day. Tomorrow, they would no longer be just lovers or partners. They would make official what had already been destined from the moment they all began to love each other. That night, Minato slept deeply after Makoto and the other girls had prepared a banquet for him, knowing his situation after a month without eating or drinking. After an entire month of concentration, that was a great relief. Even so, he couldn't help but notice the looks directed at him throughout the entire night, each one carrying their own thoughts and interests. The girls couldn't sleep properly. When day broke, Minato began to wake up to what that day represented. There, he would become a husband and make his family official. Chapter 345, The Beginning of the Namikaze Clan. Third-person POV. Yuzushiovikure, the floating island, 42. Minato looked at himself in the mirror, his black kimono perfectly fitted to his body. He was just making sure everything was in place, looking quite elegant for the day that would mark the beginning of the Namikaze clan, a clan that did not exist in this world until this very day. Having adjusted all his clothes and finally ready, he picked up the small box beside the table, placing it under his arm before disappearing without needing to form a single seal, with Hiraishin being at a level where Minato could activate it with just his will at this moment. Minato reappeared in the very next instant, before an enormous crowd of redheads gathered in one corner of the island. Knowing about Minato's wedding, which would be basically public for the entire clan, and seeing him as a savior, people quickly gathered to congratulate him and watch the ceremony. Minato entered through the only passage between 2 rows of guests. As everyone stared at him, some smiled and congratulated him, others showed recognition, and some women seemed a little disappointed to see him there, about to get married. Either way, he proceeded to the arch at the edge of the island, from where one could have a wide view of the entire sky, with a very romantic setting for a wedding, as the clouds reflected the sound of that late afternoon. The place was just a few meters from the end of the island and had been chosen precisely because of the view the sky could provide. Kushina's own mother had chosen that place, and it had been slightly altered with earth jutsus to make it firm. Akahana Uzumaki was there checking if everything was in order. The clan leader was the one who arranged the organization of the ceremony. Minato approached Masaki, beneath the arch, in his position, with a small smile. There was still no sign of his girls, they would only come at the moment the ceremony began. "I guess this stays with you," Minato said to the boy wearing a formal kimono like his, who was him. The boy Minato had known from the clan since he arrived to help them after leaving Konoha. "You can count on it, Minato-san," he said cheerfully. The boy took the box with a bit of difficulty and placed it on a small stool beside Minato. He would deliver its contents when the time came. "Well, you're here, and it's almost time. We just have to wait now. Position yourself here, facing forward," Lord Minato requested the man Masaki as he adjusted the groom's position. Minato obeyed, standing in front of him. While they waited, the guests also adjusted themselves in their seats. He noticed countless gazes upon him, whispering, while he could feel every kind of emotion they expressed through haki. There was pride, happiness, envy, and jealousy. Although these last 2 were still the smallest, there were always people like that. Soon, 2 carriages emerged from the middle of the clan, pulled by horses from the Uzumaki clan's farms. The carriages stopped in front of the event, and when the doors opened, Minato first saw Kushina and Suna stepping out together, both wearing white dresses. Next, Makoto and Hanabi stepped out of the other carriage, wearing the same type of dress, with only a few details changing here and there, bearing the symbols of their clans on them. All of them stopped for a moment, looking around, and then their eyes landed on Minato. After that, they moved toward him, each one holding a bouquet of flowers. The same could be said of Minato. The Namikaze symbol was circular, composed of 3 curved shapes resembling commas, arranged symmetrically and rotating around a common center. It conveyed the idea of continuous movement, balance, and unity. The women present were quite fascinated by the dresses and the brides, whispering among themselves. Minato also could not help but notice how all of them had special details for the occasion. Even though he himself could have taken a peek with his haki, he did not. Some of them had hairstyles different from what they usually wore on a daily basis. Suna and Hanabi wore curled hair, while Makoto and Kushina kept the hairstyle they had always used, but they wore earrings and bracelets with jewels, matching them perfectly. Hanabi did not fail to greet her grandfather among the men, opening a small smile. Kushina also smiled at her mother, as did the other girls, who waved at her. The elders greeted all of them from the front rows. Minato took a step forward and first took Kushina's hands. "You look beautiful." "All of you do," he said in a serene tone, full of conveyed confidence, so confident that he could say it the same way one says the sky is blue. Kushina smiled, satisfied, and moved to the opposite side, where Minato would stand. Minato greeted each of the girls, and they positioned themselves in a line, since the marriage would not be done all at once. Each girl would make her vow, and Minato would make his to each one of them. "Well, let's begin," said the clan leader, and Kushina took a step forward, gripping the bouquet tightly. "We are here today to celebrate the first union of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki," he began, while Minato did not take his eyes off the redhead. Kushina, in turn, kept an extremely joyful smile, lost in many thoughts. "Minato Namikaze, do you accept Kushina Uzumaki as your lawful wife?" the leader asked. "Yes," Minato replied as if it were obvious, feeling Kushina's eyes shining upon him, as she was savoring every moment there. "Kushina Uzumaki, do you accept Minato Namikaze as your lawful husband?" he continued. "Yes," she said, a little louder than she intended, without losing the wide smile on her face, and Minato was smiling back at her as well. "Well, from today on, you are husband and wife, until death do you part." "No, not even after that." "None of us will ever be separated," Kushina murmured upon hearing this, looking at the ground, with a resolute expression. Due to Minato's experiences with the impure world in the original work, Minato explained to her how life after death worked. Kushina knew that death was not the end and that, generally, people who were connected to each other in life would meet again, being able to live eternity together. Kushina had fallen in love with the idea of living eternally with her love and soulmate. Even if Minato died first, she would close her devoted heart solely to Minato and wait until her life ended to join him in the other world. The same could be said if it were the opposite, she would be waiting for him in the impure world. In the same way Mito had done for Hashirama. So that they could reunite and live the same love Mito had shared with her husband. "Well, you may kiss the bride," Masaki said to Minato. Minato nodded and pulled Kushina by the hand, pressing his lips against hers. A round of applause echoed through the crowd. Some women let out sighs at the romantic scene, while most of the men, surprisingly, also clapped and smiled. Everyone seemed happy for that powerful couple, each of them above Kage level, and who had fought for the clan. Even if some felt a bit of envy, they recognized Minato as a hero who deserved his happiness. None of them dared to say that it was unfair. Minato was the greatest role model most of the Uzumakis there had ever seen in their lives, even the elders with their long lives. Minato kissed Kushina for more than 20 seconds before pulling back a little, but she simply grabbed him by the neck and hugged him tightly, laughing loudly while still holding the bouquet. "I'm so happy." "Now I'm Kushina Namikaze, right?" she asked the clan leader, who nodded. "Yes. In front of all these witnesses, you have become Kushina Namikaze. Now you belong to your husband's clan, body and soul. Kushina Namikaze." "I like that," she said, returning to Minato and kissing him once more, with small hearts almost visibly shining in her eyes. But Kushina did not stop having fun, with her joy in her ever-contagious way. If Minato really had to say who his favorite was, as Akahana had said, he would say that Kushina won. Not that he didn't like the others equally, but with her it was different, something like a predestined faith for Minato and Kushina stronger than with the others. After all, from the moment he saw her at the academy, he felt they would have a stronger connection than with anyone else. Kushina felt that too, which was different from the original story. The original Minato Namikaze did not have this connection with Kushina from the beginning, despite winning her over later, perhaps because this Minato simply defended her when everyone laughed at her for revealing her dream, welcomed her as his friend from the start, although Tsuna had helped with that. Either way, he had finally married the woman he loved. It was hard not to avert his gaze from her dress and not imagine her without it,
feeling her curves on top of him, jumping on him, while she moaned in pleasure. Minato would taste that delicious redhead very soon.
Minato, you're not thinking something naughty, are you? Kushina did not fail to tease him, blushing when she saw his gaze over her body.
She would call him a pervert on any other occasion, but deep down, she wanted exactly that. To have him beneath her body while they made love. She had been tempted over the past month and, since then, had been feeling a constant, particular itch, hiding in the bathroom to try to relieve herself, thinking about her future husband and how they would do those naughty things. The girl had gone into panic several times thinking she might be doing something wrong or that Minato might not like her, think she was ugly. Kushina was insecure, but her desire to give her virginity to Minato was also at the surface, fueled by the hormones of an 18-year-old girl. Now that she officially had him as her husband, how could she not desire him and care about his lustful gaze imagining things? Shouldn't she be happy that he was clearly tempted by her body? After all, she was also a woman, full of expectations and desires, wanting the man she loved, just as Suna and Makoto also wanted him and already did those things with him. She was nervous, prepared for the next step. She wanted to give herself to him body and soul, but for now, she would have to wait for the ceremony to end. Kushina was about to be taken away, but Minato held her. "Aren't you forgetting your ring?" Minato joked, and Kushina looked surprised. He glanced to the side and Minato's boyfriend widened his eyes as well, already knowing that was his way of acting. The boy was a bit grossed out by the kiss, finding the interaction between men and women a bit disgusting at his age. Minato couldn't blame him, but he remained energetic, saying that he would be like Minato when he grew up, as strong as him, and would have powerful companions. The blonde simply smiled at the boy's words. His parents had returned alive from the war. He now had the clan alive and prospering while the island floated in the sky. Either way, the boy opened Minato's box, revealing 5 rings. Minato pointed to the ring meant for Kushina, and the boy carefully picked it up and brought it to Minato's hand. He took Kushina's ring, engraved with the names Minato Namikaze and Kushina Namikaze, placing it on her finger with care. Kushina admired the platinum object with fuinjutsu lines engraved into it, raising her hand against the light of that morning sun, but she couldn't observe it for long. Her mother soon guided her away from in front of Minato. Kushina looked at him one more time, smiling, before nodding and following, holding the bouquet firmly. Kushina went to the end of the line. The next was Suna, who looked at Minato with a joyful smile and a slight blush, but radiant with happiness. Minato took a deep breath to himself as he repeated the ceremony he had done with Kushina, now with another girl he also loved. The girl who had picked on him on the very first day at the academy just because he had stood out during the entrance ceremony tests by getting in the way of her family. Minato thought she was very similar to his mother, spoiled, as the great-granddaughter of the first Hokage, also known as the daughter of the Senju princess, being another princess of the village. But in the end, her arrogance turned into something else. A friendship formed between them and, finally, feelings that both developed for each other over the years, even before Kushina appeared in the village. Just like Kushina, Suna also displayed an open and genuinely happy smile. "Put the ring on first this time," the man said as soon as both had made their vows. Minato took Suna's ring and placed it on her finger, while she mimicked Kushina, admiring it and turning her hand from side to side. "Now you may kiss the bride," Misaki said. Suna laughed out loud before raising her arms, wrapping them around Minato's neck, and taking the initiative to kiss him passionately, but only pressing their lips together. "I'll see you later. I want tonight to be special," she said, going to the end of the line. The next was Makoto, displaying her joyful smile. Perhaps a little more discreet than the others. Even so, Minato could feel the emotion inside her. In fact, it was greater than that of the others. There was pure and intense love there, not only for Minato, but also for the child she carried. They said that the Uchihas had stronger feelings than any other lineage, and Makoto had become the embodiment of love within the clan at that moment. "You may kiss the bride," came the order again as soon as the vows were accepted. Minato slowly but firmly approached Makoto's lips. The kiss grew intense, and Minato was surprised when Makoto acted differently. Her tongue tried to invade his, and he let himself be carried away, responding with an even more passionate kiss. A round of applause echoed through the crowd, along with joyful expressions, as everyone had expected something more reserved, but the kiss ended up being even more intense than the previous ones.
When Makoto returned to the end of the line, Kushina and Suna looked at her shamelessly, but Makoto only smiled with closed lips, satisfied with the impression she had made by kissing Minato.
The last was Hanabi, who approached timidly, even more so than Makoto.
She maintained a delicate posture, yet firm before the ceremony. "You are now Hanabi Namikaze.
I declare you both husband and wife.
You may kiss the bride." With that, Hanabi did not waste time.
She pulled Minato toward her, placing both hands on his face before kissing him directly. The kiss was deep and intense, bolder than the others, as she turned red, yet still pressed her lips against his, tasting him. "She's worse than Makoto, shameless," Kushina could not help but murmur, thinking that Makoto had already crossed the line with that kiss, but Hanabi had gone even further. That kiss was an invitation to bed, and she didn't need that.
How had someone as shy and inexperienced as her become so bold? The girls thought.
Either way, when they pulled apart, even a bit of saliva remained stuck to their lips, and Hanabi was extremely red, unable to look at anyone after the kiss, much less Minato, keeping her head lowered. "Well, it seems we're finished here," the leader said, satisfied, clapping along with the crowd. "Now, let's leave here straight for the honeymoon I prepared. Why don't you throw the flower bouquets?" Minato said to the 4 girls. Hearing that, the crowd of women quickly gathered in front of them. "Hey, throw it to me," they shouted, asking for the bouquets while raising their hands. The first to throw was Kushina, who turned her back and tossed the bouquet into the air. Suna did the same, followed by Makoto, while several women quickly scrambled to catch the flowers. Hanabi was the last to turn and throw. The bouquet ended up being grabbed by an Uzumaki after a small dispute among the participants. "Now, how about all of you give me your hands?" Minato asked. The 4 approached him, forming a circle, holding hands. Then, Minato entered sage mode of Mount Mayaboku. "I'm going on our honeymoon. I'll be away for 1 or 2 weeks, but I'll return at some point to strengthen the clouds, since Durin couldn't maintain the one she created during my training," Minato informed them. In the very next moment, he disappeared along with his 4 wives. From that point on, they would enjoy their honeymoon, and Minato didn't want absolutely anything to bother them. Chapter 346, Makoto, the Teacher. R18. Third Person POV. Unknown place, the floating island, 42. From somewhere on a continent very far from the ninja world, a house stood in the middle of a beach. The structure was a bit crooked, as if the house had landed there firmly rather than having been built on the spot. The place was large, and inside it, in a very spacious room, Minato woke up to the sound of seagulls and ocean waves. The first thing the blonde noticed was the feeling of a soft, feminine leg resting on top of his chest. Hanabi's leg, he identified. He also felt something very soft pressing against his right side. A big, firm breast. Suna. He thought, not failing to squeeze it with a bit of morning pleasure. And in his other hand, something firmer, yet still pleasant to touch. "It's Kushina's ass," he thought mischievously, squeezing it. There was another weight on his stomach, which he knew was someone's head close to his limp penis, but Makoto did not seem to mind sleeping there at all, dozing peacefully. He opened his eyes, knowing he was in a huge bed, surrounded by 4 naked female bodies. He was the only one sleeping in a straight line, all the others were around him, sleeping in unique positions, surrounding him awkwardly. Some upside down, others bent and twisted. Hanabi was almost falling off the bed with her hair hanging off the edge. Makoto had taken his pillow. Suna was hugging his arm alongside her body while he kept squeezing her breast. Kushina was turned the opposite way, seemingly sticking her ass out for him to grab. Minato could not help but let out a small sigh, not in a negative way, but thinking about how that night had been full of action. In truth, he had not even really slept, perhaps only dozed for half an hour this morning, while the girls had finally passed out. There were bottles of sake and wine scattered around the room. The night before, Minato had left the Uzumaki clan and gone to the continent of the Dragon clan. After that, he asked Guren to take him somewhere quite remote, as the dragon guided them to an isolated location on the northern coast of the continent, very far from Guren's clan. When they arrived there, Minato opened a large scroll and simply pulled an enormous house out of it, a house he had managed to seal inside a storage scroll. No one did something like that, but he was able to because he was a master of Fuinjutsu, so there were no major problems. The house, obviously, had not been built on that land and ended up a bit crooked. Even so, Hanabi managed to align it using an earth jutsu. Minato thanked Guren, and the dragon would have even slept there, but he did not want to disturb the newlyweds' honeymoon, so he returned to the dragon territory during the night. When they entered the house, Minato opened a bottle of wine and took bottles of sake out of the scrolls. No one there was used to drinking, they rarely did it, but that night was special. He wanted to leave at least Kushina and Hanabi, who were more nervous, a bit more relaxed. Even Suna, whom he had only slept with once, still seemed a little nervous and embarrassed. Makoto was more easygoing and helped the others relax better. Even so, they drank sake and wine while starting with small conversations. The girls now seemed excited while talking, laughing, and relaxing even though they knew what would come next. What no one expected was Tsuna making a slightly drunk revelation, unable to wait until the next day to tell her husband and the other marriage sisters. "Minato, I'm pregnant," Tsuna said simply. Everyone stopped their conversations and laughter, turning their attention to her. Minato looked at her, his eyes widening more and more, slowly. "So fast?" Minato murmured. He had only had sexual relations with her once, and even so, she got pregnant. Still, he could not help but show a smile after a few seconds of initial surprise, just a little disappointed that he still could not feel these things with his observation haki yet. "My second child, our child," Minato said, pulling her to him. Makoto, on the other side, did not refuse her husband's passionate kiss. The girls were also happy, congratulating her. Basically, they were now marriage sisters, and their children would also be considered the children of all of them. They had already discussed this with Minato himself. After all, a marriage already needs to be well discussed when it involves only two people. Imagine when it involves 4 women for 1 man. Minato had his harem of beautiful and powerful kunoichis. Obviously, rules had been established between the girls and Minato if they wanted that relationship to work. First, the children would be treated as their own children. Everyone should be treated fairly. Obviously, the mothers would give more attention to their own biological children than to any other child, but no other son or daughter should be neglected. Second, Minato would have to divide his time among them. If he wanted to maintain a happy and healthy marriage, he would have to always satisfy the emotional and physical needs of all the women there. Anyway, they drank in honor of the new child who had been growing for a month in Makoto's belly. At a certain moment, Makoto decided to take the initiative, seeing that it was getting late. They were sitting cross-legged on a large futon, drinking in the middle of the floor. Makoto approached Minato with a blush and caught him and all of them by surprise when she started kissing the blonde in front of everyone. The girls remained watching, euphoric from the alcohol, more relaxed, as they saw Makoto move to his neck while she began to remove his kimono with her hands. When she took it off, Minato revealed his toned chest, befitting a man who could make nations tremble just by hearing his name. Makoto slowly moved down, kissing Minato's body with pleasure. She reached close to his stomach, placing kisses on his abdominal muscles, then stopped and looked back at the other 3 girls. "Well, I'll be the first. Since I have experience with this, watch," she said, her pride turning into a mischievous smile. She seemed about to do something before moving closer to Minato's stomach again, returning to kissing it. The girls watched closely. Hanabi was extremely red with embarrassment, almost turning her face away, but she couldn't, watching Makoto lower herself over Minato as he sat there. Kushina, on the other hand, due to the alcohol, seemed excited by the scene. Despite her cheeks turning red like never before, she lost part of her shame and began to watch carefully, trying to learn. Suna was also somewhat excited. She remembered Minato kissing her intimate part and driving her crazy, missing that sensation. Makoto had mentioned that she could also please Minato with her own mouth, and Suna, though still insecure, certainly wanted to learn. Lemon scene happened. Minato showed a calm smile. He was still ready for action. After all, he hadn't climaxed with Makoto.
It would be a long night.
He could feel it at that moment. He still had 3 girls to satisfy right there.
Chapter 347 1 Week Honeymoon. Third Person POV. Unknown Place, 42. Lemon scene happened.
When it finally ended, the sun was already shining through the window, and all of them were resting around him. The first thing he did was move Makoto off his stomach and place her to the side. She looked at him sleepily but said nothing, still wanting to rest. Minato, on the other hand, definitely needed a bath. He was completely sweaty, with feminine fluids all over his body, mixed with sweat. He disappeared in an instant using his teleportation. The first thing he did after appearing in the middle of the beach was to move straight toward the sea, about 300 meters from the shore, before simply letting himself fall. He let his body plunge directly into the water, crashing against it to cool off as he surfaced. "This is life," he said to himself. Minato stayed there for about half an hour, letting his body float while enjoying the morning sun.
"Can I join you?"
He already knew someone was approaching. When the blonde noticed that he wasn't in the room, she went to him, walking over the water.
The sound of the waves and the seagulls was the only thing that could be heard behind Suna.
Minato smiled, shifting his gaze away from the sky and turning his head, seeing the naked woman standing near him, one hand on her hip, staring at him with her usual arrogance, though also slightly blushing.
A perfect tsundere, Minato thought.
"I see you've lost your shame," he said, looking her body up and down. She didn't seem shaken by Minato's eyes examining her naked body, not after everything that had happened.
"I'm not the only one," she replied, raising an eyebrow. Minato was naked as well.
"You know I'm like this by nature," he said, opening a mischievous smile. He leaned into the water and moved closer to her. Without warning, he grabbed her feet and pulled her down. She let out a feminine scream as she was dragged into the water with force, while he held onto her right after. "Of course you can join me," he said, answering the earlier question. She let out a light huff, feeling him holding her by the waist as she took the initiative to extend her arms and wrap them around his neck. She said nothing, she simply leaned in for a kiss, pressing her breasts against his chest as she crushed her lips against his. Minato stayed there for a while longer, his body floating on the water, held tightly in the embrace of the Senju princess, followed by her sweet, lingering kiss. He still observed the house in the distance through his observation haki, but none of the girls had left the bed yet. "After all that war, this almost doesn't feel real," she said as she pulled away from him, breaking the silence. "We're here, enjoying things peacefully, in a place we don't even know where it is." She looked around, seeing nothing but forests and the sea.
"Have you ever imagined yourself in a place other than the elemental nations?" Minato asked in an amused tone.
"We grew up in Konoha learning everything about the great nations and the smaller ones, about the ninja world. But there are other unexplored parts of the world. The clans of giant animals are older than the ninjas themselves and live in these lands. There are also uninhabitable places and even civilizations living without even knowing about chakra. I wouldn't doubt that, on this continent where we are, people use primitive weapons to wage war against each other."
"Like bows and arrows?"
she asked.
"Yes. Bows and arrows, swords and shields," he replied.
"It really feels like we're in the middle of nowhere," she laughed, but then returned to him, kissing him again. She had grown to love feeling his lips on hers so freely, enjoying the taste and the pleasure it brought. "But I like it," she said as she pulled away, smiling happily. "Well, now all that's left is to enjoy it," he replied simply. Even so, she had a somewhat perceptive look.
"And what are the plans, Minato? What will happen after all this?"
"We're a family now, but we haven't talked about that," she said.
Minato sighed. "We'll remain with the Uzumaki clan. We won't abandon it.
If Konoha accepts us back, it will be on our conditions. The Uzumaki clan will take part in the village as a new, independent clan, just like the Senju, Uchiha, Hyuga, Nara, and the other clans." He paused briefly. "But I want to enjoy ourselves while we're here. We don't have any responsibility toward the village or anything like that right now, so we can train. I want to develop even more abilities, and you know that.
I know, she replied. And I have some things to tell you.
She said it, drawing an intrigued look from Minato. I don't know if it's just my imagination, but I feel like my chakra is changing, Minato. Minato remembered the merging of chakra they had experienced.
Kushina had also reacted very well to his light chakra when they were together. In fact, it was as if she had welcomed Minato's yang with pleasure, nothing too abnormal.
Hanabi, on the other hand, seemed perfectly normal. As for Makoto's chakra, it had also begun reacting strangely lately, ever since she had awakened her inner Mangekyo. It was as if something was coming together, trying to merge. Minato had thought about it for a while, and Makoto was the easiest to figure out, since it was not without precedent. After all, Madara developed the Rinnegan after obtaining the eternal Mangekyo with Hashirama's cells, which were extremely rich in yang. Minato might not have the body of a Senju, but he was certainly rich in yang and far more powerful than Hashirama in that regard. Tsunade's chakra was also being affected, even more than Makoto's. It was still a bit mysterious to Minato, and he looked at the girl. "Tell me, is something happening?" he asked, a little concerned. His haki detected a certain alteration in her chakra, and when he focused on it more closely, he saw the source, a small life now there. Minato concentrated enough to perceive their child forming in her womb. Her chakra was being directly altered by the child. Suna was unaware of Minato's thoughts and discoveries and continued. She looked at him with intense eyes. "I swear I saw a flower bloom right in front of me, Minato. I didn't do anything, I just looked at it, thought it was beautiful, imagining how it would be when it bloomed, and then it happened. I was startled. For a moment, I thought I could enchant flowers in our house if I wanted to," she said. Minato raised an eyebrow for a second before lowering it. "Suna, your developing would release," he murmured. The girl's eyes widened. "What? What are you saying?" She couldn't believe it herself. That possibility had never crossed her mind, much less anything beyond the technical inheritance of her great-grandfather. "You do know that to develop Mokuton you need earth, water, and life, right?" he said. She was surprised. "Earth, water, and life? I have earth and water, but life, wait, are you saying it's because of my child?" She began to form her suspicion, but Minato stopped her from continuing. "It's not just about having a child, but about my young. You are certainly sharing it through the small umbilical cord that is forming between you and the child. That is my chakra, and all of my children will have extremely high yang strength. It's very likely that you've developed even more yang within yourself thanks to the child and also, well, our sexual relations." He paused briefly. "We should keep an eye on this over the next few months. You might become a Mokuton user like the first Hokage. Just imagine your mother's face when she sees that," Minato said, laughing, while Tsuna looked at him, stunned. I have Mokuton?" She still couldn't believe it. "I don't know for sure yet. We still need to observe, but in theory, that would be it," he said enthusiastically. "Don't fill me with hope, Minato. If I really have this, then I'll become stronger, and I would love to see the look on my mother's face and even my uncle's. I'll have my great-grandfather's legacy." "How is this even still possible?" she said, playing along, exclaiming happily as she held onto him more tightly and kissed him, excited by the hope of possessing the legendary would release. "Just imagine that. We wouldn't even have to worry about traveling. You could build wooden castles," Minato commented in a dreamy tone. Suna made a face. "Do you think I'm only useful for making wooden castles, Minato Namikaze?" she complained. Minato simply laughed at her temperament. "What is it?" "I just pointed out something useful." "That doesn't mean you're limited to that, my love," he said in a relaxed tone. Suna blushed like a young girl in love when she heard Minato call her that. "When you talk like that, any girl would melt," she murmured. Minato pulled her closer, looked toward the house in the distance, and as he pulled back slightly, said, "We still have some time." He returned a meaningful look to her. Suna smiled and held onto him more tightly. "Then let's enjoy it," she whispered in his ear. After another moment together in the middle of the sea, the girls finally woke up some time later.
Minato returned to the house with Tsuna and began preparing breakfast. Minato sat there watching the girls return from the beach, drying themselves with towels, not bothering to put on clothes, despite the flushed faces of Hanabi and Kushina, who didn't want to lose to Tsuna and Makoto, who were much more at ease. Minato also didn't mind at all being surrounded by naked beauties.
In the end, they enjoyed every single day there over the course of a week. There were nearby waterfalls and some adventures in the forest to pass the time.
Minato had everything.
Books, food, ingredients for banquets, and drinks, all stored within his scrolls. The girls set up a volleyball net and played on the beach among themselves, although Tsuna had monstrous strength and they ended up using taijutsu to punch the ball. Minato had shown them the sport just to see them laughing together, but it ended up looking like a true battlefield. After that, they moved on to a more violent activity, exchanging blows and sparring training. Tsuna was excited about the possible Mokuton and began trying every jutsu she knew, using techniques she had learned from the Senju clan.
She tried to manifest any sign of wood, but she couldn't. Minato believed it was still far too early.
And there was no lack of sex between them either.
Minato wouldn't have been surprised if Kushina and Hanabi also ended up pregnant after an entire week there, having sex during the night, in the morning, and even in the afternoon.
The girls even competed with each other, trying to get Minato alone anywhere on the beach, in the forest, or inside the house. There was a feminine territorial dispute over the only male among the females, even more intense after they had completely given themselves over, their bodies yearning for the orgasms Minato was capable of providing in every encounter. On the last day, the girls were drinking and gossiping. Minato was reading some scrolls in a corner and thought about opening some forbidden techniques kept by the Uzumaki clan, which he had found in separate boxes, but he had not read them with his clones. He informed the clan leader that he would take them to study, and that was what he did over the 5 days.
One of the scrolls caught Minato's attention that night, one he had not yet opened.
While the girls were distracted, he removed it from the box with a click, revealing a sealed scroll. Minato picked it up and placed it on himself as he opened it, but he felt something wrong at that moment. Suddenly, a glow burst from the scroll.
Minato did not even have time to close it.
Not even his haki had been able to foresee something like that. All the girls immediately looked forward, seeing the scroll floating in front of Minato, generating an intense light that enveloped everyone for a moment.
Instinctively, everyone went into a battle stance.
When the light faded, the scroll was empty.
Minato was standing in front of them, looking at the girls. No one understood what had just happened. "Minato, what did you do?" Tsuna stepped forward.
Minato scratched the back of his head.
"I don't know. I just wanted to see what was written. I didn't even manage to read it," he said.
The girls looked at each other, then shrugged and returned to their routine.
Minato decided that he would not mess with forbidden Uzumaki clan scrolls again, at least for now. Chapter 348 Itachi Namikaze. Third-person POV. Mount Mayaboku, 43. Minato, will you come back?
Minato paused for a moment as he was about to say goodbye and leave, and his eyes returned to the man who had just asked the question, standing a few meters away from him.
"Not now," he said. "Sensei. I won't return to Konoha for a while." He simply spoke, while Jiraiya was with him in one of his small meetings at Mount Mayaboku, where they had been talking over the past few months. More than 7 months had already passed since Minato had married his 4 wives, and it still took some time before he finally made contact with Jiraiya for the first time through the Toad clan. Jiraiya was immediately curious to know how he was doing and where they were, while Minato wanted to know the state of the ninja world and also of Konoha after the war against the Uzumaki clan. Obviously, all elemental relations had been turned upside down. Dead Kages and missing Bijou were just one of the problems that the 4 elemental nations that united against the Uzumaki clan faced. Losses in military strength from all nations, even low, mid, and high-level ninjas, were the greatest blow they felt. Losing 5,000 ninjas was not worth a Kage or even a Bijou. The most sought-after name in the bingo book belonged to Minato, and his companions came right after. Minato was at the top with 500 million ryo. Kushina had 300 million ryo. Makoto had 200 million ryo. Suna had 200 million ryo. Hanabi had 100 million ryo.
Everyone there was at the top, and considering that Asuma Sarutobi had a confirmed bounty of 35 million ryo in Naruto Shippuden, revealed when Kakuzu delivers his head, Minato had a very satisfying bounty, being almost 15 times higher. And Minato had disappeared from the ninja world along with his wives, leaving a gap that no one could fill. The uncertainty and frustration were things enemy ninjas felt when they heard that name. No one knew where they had been for the last 8 months since the war had taken place. His name still echoed throughout the ninja world. Rumors about his strength and also that of his companions were still whispered in meetings of elders, high command, and even in simple bars. Many of those who survived the attack often spoke openly about what they witnessed that day. All villages and organizations sought information about Minato and his companions, where they were, what they were doing. The disappearance of the entire clan's island, never seen again since reports from some witnesses claimed it flew into the sky, caused even more unease, as there had been no sign of them since they ascended into the heavens. Minato was surprised to learn that the village wanted him back and was willing to accept him, even after everything. Sarutobi no longer gave any political opinions alongside the former elders. They had been placed in ostracism after all their schemes along with Danzo. Danzo had been labeled a criminal, the greatest of all time in Konoha after all his crimes against the village itself. Now, with Tsukumo still leading the village but never fully reassuming the role of Hokage, he led the village together with the other members of the council, all the clans that had allied with Minato against the village elders, and they reached unanimity in wanting Minato back in the village. Tsunade and Jiraiya also agreed with this without a second thought. Even though they did not officially participate in the council, they still had a voice. Not even the former Kage opposed it. Jiraiya, every time he saw Minato, tried to convince him. Minato was already far too powerful. He would even judge the village for going after him precisely because of his strength, but he knew that the village itself had decided they should help the Uzumaki clan, even if they had arrived late. But Minato said he would not return, at least not now. As he always told his sensei, he had been training over the past few months. He had mastered his draconic form, improved his 2 basic haki, and finally begun to master the Conqueror's haki. Minato was quite satisfied with his progress, and it wasn't just him. All the girls had improved, each in their own strengths. And it was still not time to return to Konoha. That was why, once again, he looked at his sensei and gave that same answer. And Jiraiya still wasn't finished. They want to pass the hat to you, you know? Minato stopped again. As he was about to walk away, his eyes returned to Jiraiya, with a surprised look. They want me to take it on, even after everything? It's exactly after everything that they want you to wear the hat. You know how it is, Tsukumo is willing to pass it to you, that's why he never accepted being Hokage. The village recognizes your courage, Minato. Even though you became a deserter, everyone knows the reason and you triumphed. You never harmed the village, quite the opposite, you only fought for the right to save an ally when everyone else refused to see it. They feel ashamed, but they also recognize your courage. The courage that a true Hokage needs. That hat naturally belongs to you. Minato was there being invited to become the 4th Hokage. He stared at his sensei, there was a gleam of pride and hope in his eyes toward the blonde. They were on the side of Mount Mayaboku where he used to train with Kushina and Makoto, not at the center of the mountain. I want to become Hokage one day. I want to lead the village, Minato confessed. But this is not the moment. Not yet. You know that. The villages are beginning to gather strength again, and a war could break out at any moment. They want retaliation for what happened, for Konoha not honoring its agreement, or so they suggest. Even if I was considered a rogue ninja, don't worry. When that moment comes, I will return. I want to protect the village, and I will do that, sensei. Minato spoke with conviction. Obviously, if a third great war broke out, he would return to Konoha. So you will return, Jiraiya said, seeming very satisfied to hear that, breaking into a wide smile. He hated knowing that Minato had left the village ever since he heard about it, even though he had begun to understand his reasons even before the Uzumaki clan war. Well, then we'll finally be able to calm down the new daimyo of the Land of Fire. Did you know that the son of the one we rescued took over after his father died? But he still carries the same feelings as his father. How did he die? Minato asked. A heart attack. He had a heart attack. TSK. That guy ate nothing but unhealthy food and was sedentary. Minato grumbled. But he couldn't help thinking, remembering the old and pompous daimyo, who had wanted to make him his personal guard ever since he saved him and his family from foreign ninjas. The daimyo's family had a good image of Minato, and Jiraiya always said that the daimyo sent letters to Konoha demanding Minato's return, becoming furious and even going so far as to demand Hiruzen's head after hearing about certain plans of the former Hokage. This proved that Minato had left a strong mark on the greatest financial power of the Land of Fire. His son now sends letters every week, asking for reports on where you are and requesting that you return. He even sends invitations, wanting to personally summon you to the daimyo's headquarters, in the capital of the Land of Fire, to negotiate your return. They also heard about your performance in the Battle of Uzushigakure, Jiraiya said. Minato smiled. Well, that kid had been quite enthusiastic back then. He must have grown a lot since then. It had been more than 2 years since Minato last saw him, since the Kage summit. Anyway, I'm going, sensei. My wife will give birth today to my first child. I can't be late, Minato said. Jiraiya couldn't help but feel his heart tighten. A child of his favorite disciple was about to be born, and he wouldn't be able to be there. Congratulations, Minato. I'm sure Lord Mazu Uchiha will be delighted to hear about this, Jiraiya said, scratching the back of his head, a little embarrassed. Makoto's father and clan head, Minato knew he was about to retire. Fugaku would take over the clan. Minato still didn't quite know how to think about that. After all, he had stolen Fugaku's bride, and now the child who was originally supposed to be his would belong to Minato. Minato had messed up the entire known future with that, but he didn't care. He loved Makoto and she felt the same, so whatever came next, they would deal with it together. Now, he needed to focus on his girl and on his child. Speaking of that, when do you think Tsunade's grandchild will be born? Jiraiya asked, laughing. He already knew that Tsuna had been pregnant for many months. He will be born in about a month and a half. Everything points to that, Minato replied. I'll tell the others. She's going to be extremely irritated. She already couldn't attend your wedding, just imagine finding out that her grandchild was born while she was away. That's going to drive her crazy, Jiraiya said, laughing. When all of this is over, we'll gather again. We won't need to hide anymore, Minato said. I know, Jiraiya replied, opening a proud smile. You've become the most powerful living ninja of the elemental nations, and you've grown even stronger. He still remembered when he went to train with Minato and had taken a completely one-sided beating. Not to mention the ability the boy had now. Minato could simply release his aura and cover the entire Mount Mayaboku with yellow lightning. The pressure was so immense that it made even veteran toads kneel. This was the result of Minato's intense training over the last 6 months focused solely on the Conqueror's haki. Not to mention his draconic form, which was at least 8 times more powerful than Toad Sage Mode. His student had become extraordinary from the moment he met him, and now had reached a level that might only be among legendary ninjas like Madara and Hashirama. For Jiraiya, there was no doubt, Minato was the child of the prophecy. His thoughts occasionally drifted to Nagato, whom he hadn't seen in years. Even without a Rinnegan, Minato was one step ahead of any living ninja. You're leaving, sensei. We'll talk again next month. By then, I'll bring my son. You can bring Tsunade, and I'll bring my wives, Minato said. In the next moment, Jiraiya waved as he watched Minato disappear. He had gathered nature chakra in a single instant. Another evolution of his, entering Sage Mode even faster than anyone else had ever managed, even Naruto in Kurama Mode in the original. Jiraiya merely listened inside, as he asked to be returned to Konoha. Minato, on the other hand, returned to the Uzumaki clan, and his eyes quickly turned toward their house. He disappeared in the next instant and appeared inside the residence, just as Makoto was being taken to a room after her water broke.
"Minato, you're here," Kushina said, smiling. Right after that, she broke into a huge grin. He's being born. Minato had only left for a short period that morning to talk with Jiraiya. He hadn't expected to arrive at the decisive moment. Even so, he quickly entered the room, where some Uzumaki women were helping Makoto settle into bed. He approached her, and Makoto immediately fixed her eyes on him. "He's coming, Minato."
"Our son," she said, her tone filled with tenderness and love. Minato kissed her forehead and held her hand.
"Yes. Our little boy is going to be born.
And he'll come strong," he said, as he watched the other girls enter and surround Makoto.
Kushina and Tsunade would easily take care of any injuries, while the midwives instructed Makoto to push the baby little by little. It took a few hours for the labor to truly progress. Makoto was a strong woman, but even so, the childbirth proved to be a challenge.
She faced it with determination, while the midwives kept telling her to maintain the rhythm and push, because the child needed to be born. After some more time, the room was finally filled with the infant cry of a strong, energetic baby.
Minato took him as soon as the midwife handed him over after cleaning him with a cloth.
He looked at the little boy, who had completely taken after Makoto's appearance, but he knew, without any doubt, that there were some things of his in there as well. The boy continued crying, and an overwhelming love took Minato's heart at that moment.
His son.
He approached Makoto, who couldn't take her eyes off the child in the father's arms, with an almost wild instinct of protection. Minato placed the baby beside her, and Makoto embraced him, as the crying began to calm down.
The boy quickly melted the hearts of Kushina, Tsunade, and Hinata, who were watching nearby. "He's so tiny. Minato, look. He got your nose and your chin," Kushina said, laughing with joy as she leaned in to kiss the baby's forehead. "Let's call him Itachi," Makoto declared. Minato nodded.
In truth, he had already been thinking of calling him that, but Makoto was faster, believing that name was fitting for their first child.
Minato watched in silence as Makoto interacted with the baby.
Itachi would be the first of many, but he also represented their future.
Itachi Namikaze. That name sounded perfect in Minato's mind. Chapter 349 Power Levels. Third-person POV. Unknown location, 43. "So you're ready?" Minato asked calmly.
The redhead in front of him opened a small, confident smile, saying that she was ready. "Very well," he said, taking a fighting stance.
Kushina stood in front of Minato as they headed to an isolated location on another continent.
She transformed into a golden light, entering complete Kurama mode in front of her husband. Minato, on the other hand, remained normal, but that wouldn't stop him from taking action in an instant to match her on the same level of power. It was just a sparring match, something they had both been doing over the past few months. In the next moment, Kushina disappeared, using a speed that even a Raikage in his lightning cloak form would barely be able to follow. Even so, Minato had already appeared in front of her in an instant, surpassing even Kushina's speed. She raised her hand to throw a punch when she saw him, while he closed his own hand, coating it in a layer of armament haki, and struck hers immediately. An explosion erupted in the next instant, the two fists colliding and generating a violent shockwave. The terrain began to be devastated by just this exchange of punches. Minato managed to push her back, his strength surpassing hers, and even made another move, touching her fist with just a single finger as Kushina was already retreating. She was dragged across the destroyed ground and barely had time to react when Minato teleported in front of her.
"What?"
she exclaimed, remembering that Minato had touched her fist with just one finger, enough to create a miniature mark. She didn't even have time to react before receiving a kick that exploded the ground, launching her body backward.
"What is it, Kushina? Getting beaten up by this brat and still calling yourself my Jinchuriki?" Kurama mocked internally, watching the battle from inside Kushina. "I'm trying, but Minato was full of tricks," Kushina muttered. "Erase the seal quickly," Kurama demanded.
But Minato had already appeared in front of Kushina, delivering another kick against the ground, making the earth explode and sending debris into the sky after the impact. She felt the blow as she erased the seal with her own golden chakra flames. When she looked at the ground she had left, she noticed a glow emerging from the holes that Minato had made by kicking her. Suddenly, hundreds or even thousands of small lights began to be fired in her direction. Kushina entered defensive mode as hundreds of chains burst from her back, quickly forming a protective barrier around her with the adamantine chains. The beams of light immediately began striking them, generating multiple explosions in the sky. "You're handling it well," Kurama observed, while Kushina remained inside the cocoon of chains. However, she felt a combined impact when Minato threw a punch using haki from the outside, causing the chains to begin cracking. Minato was still in the air when he raised his hand once more and threw a second punch, completely shattering the layer of chains in the next instant. At the same time, Kushina appeared with a giant Rasengan, rapidly growing as she advanced toward him. Minato took only 1 millisecond to raise his own hand and form another Rasengan, which immediately grew to match the size of Kushina's. Both collided in midair, generating another colossal explosion in the sky and destroying the remaining Uzumaki chains, as the two forces clashed and pressed against each other, creating a cyclone. The air had changed, and a chakra hurricane enveloped the two of them, until the forces could no longer sustain themselves and began to rupture. The clash resulted in a massive explosion, sending Kushina and Minato flying in opposite directions. Kushina was protected by the Kurama cloak, while Minato suffered several injuries to his body as he recovered using his Logia. Minato acted quickly, using Jeppo to stabilize himself in the air, and then he flashed. He advanced in a straight line toward Kushina. Seeing this, Kushina quickly created several adamantine chains, firing them at him. Minato interrupted his direct advance and used his light fruit with Jeppo to evade, moving in a zigzag between the attacks as hundreds of chains tried to stop him. As a last resort, Kushina created Fox Chakra hands, trying to grab him or strike him with a newly formed Rasengan. For an instant, she thought she had caught him, at least pushed him away, but she soon noticed a kunai swaying beside her, marked with the Hiratian symbol. Her eyes widened, and she could do nothing about it. Minato appeared in front of her, escaping the attacks, and landed another precise blow with a kick of light to her stomach. Even Kurama seemed to feel it inside Kushina. Kushina seemed to spit saliva and was launched at high speed toward the ground by the kick, feeling intense pain as she violently collided with the earth, creating a crater. Minato grabbed the kunai while still in the air and advanced toward the ground, teleporting with light and approaching cautiously. Kushina was partially buried, and he thought he might have overdone it a bit. Knowing her well, he knew what would happen next. Shortly after, she appeared with a pout, while her chakra was still glowing. "You didn't need to hit so hard," she said accusingly. "Well, I guess I overdid it a little, but remember that our enemies won't show us any mercy, Kushina. You'd better get used to lethal combat." "That's what we're training for the future," Minato replied. Even so, Kushina remained sulky. "But I'm your wife. You shouldn't attack me like that," she said, looking hurt. "Kushina, let's continue. I'm not doing this to hurt you, I know you can withstand these blows," Minato said, while thinking to himself whether that girl was in one of those days when she was a bomb of strange emotions. "I don't want to," she replied simply, crossing her arms and puffing out her cheeks like a spoiled child. Minato was a little lost for a moment. "All right. If you don't want to continue, we'll stop here. But if you want to fight more, I promise that afterward we'll travel around the ninja world. What do you think, my love?" Minato said, giving a wink. Kushina seemed to perk up at hearing that. "Really? Like a romantic date with my husband? I'd love that," she exclaimed. "Yes," Minato replied, scratching his head at her behavior. She opened a wide smile, clearly excited. "Perfect. Then let's continue," she said. Her mood changed so quickly that Minato suspected it was all just an act to get something out of him. Somehow, among all his wives, Kushina was the one who played dirty the most just to receive affection. Then chakra exploded from Kushina's body at that moment, beginning to take shape.
First, the tails appeared, until Kushina began to fully transform into the yellow nine-tailed fox.
A powerful roar echoed through the region, spreading across the entire area. Certainly, if there were civilizations in that corner of the world, everyone would be terrified by that sound. However, the place was completely deserted. Kushina finally completed the transformation, fully dominant. "Come at me with everything, husband," she said confidently. Minato had already disappeared. She looked surprised when he appeared right in front of her. His fist, coated in haki, struck the fox's face violently, sending Kushina flying away. The enormous body devastated the entire forest as it was hurled through it. Far away, the sound of the impact, along with the destruction of the forest, broke Tsuna's concentration, who at that moment was focused on her own training. "They're really fired up," Hanabi murmured beside her while watching from a distance. Makoto was the only one not present at the location, as she was taking care of little Itachi at home, breastfeeding him. The boy still needed care, and Tsuna's belly was already quite large. Minato's second child would be born in a few weeks. When Minato said he wanted to test his strength against Kushina, Tsuna hadn't imagined it would be at full power. Still, she took a deep breath and focused again, ignoring the thunderous battle echoing through the region, as the nine-tailed fox was struck by a sequence of punches and kicks. Kushina tried to escape the brutal pressure Minato was applying to her, but he was too fast, and those armament haki punches were extremely destructive. He was far more powerful than Tsuna's brute strength with Sage Mode. Tsuna concentrated once more. In front of her, she began forming several hand seals. When she finished, the ground began to tremble and trees started to rise. She was trying to replicate the wood dragon. Since the conversation she had with Minato shortly after the wedding, he had already said that she would be able to develop Mokuton. As the months passed, this began to be confirmed. Tsuna showed an affinity with the legendary element that, until then, had only been reproduced through Orochimaru's experiments, and by just one boy still alive, Yamato, who was being taken care of by Tsuna's own mother, Tsunade. She still couldn't fully develop the technique for some time, but her chakra was already beginning to react with the surrounding plants. Just by her presence, flowers bloomed, and trees showed abnormal growth. When she tried again, it took a while, but finally the first sprout was born through her efforts. Tsuna was perplexed. Minato had already told her that the main cause of that was himself and the child she carried in her womb. Her body was being nourished by an enormous amount of yang, awakening in her that affinity and the element that was missing to create Mokuton in Tsuna. The baby shared its chakra, transmitting this connection with the element of life through the umbilical cord. Minato, in turn, did this through intimate contact, when their chakras mixed during their conjugal relations. Since then, Tsuna had been developing her abilities, becoming increasingly powerful. She could already create wood clones, which were far superior to shadow clones, to the point that even Minato felt a twinge of envy. After that, she began creating trees and even houses. Minato had suggested that she could put an end to the problem of carrying houses around inside scrolls, much to Tsuna's displeasure. She was proud. Proud to have managed to develop that element. Minato had said that their child, whether a girl or a boy, would also inherit the wood element in a purer form than Tsuna or Yamato. This left Tsunade even more motivated. She had found a way to become stronger and now trained tirelessly for it. Even pregnant, taking care not to harm the child, she still had a chance to catch up to Kushina and Makoto. Makoto, in turn, had shown great power in recent months. Now, with Itachi alive, she had no more worries and had fully released her Susanoo for the first time a few days ago, awakening a legendary power that, in the past, only her great-grandfather Hashirama could face. With the wood element, Tsuna could now also become as powerful as her two marriage sisters, who had Kurama and Susanoo. She continued trying to form the wood dragon at that moment. The roots began to unite, creating the first shape, but soon she failed. The dragon did not complete in time and began to fall apart. She still did not have enough mastery, most likely because she was limiting herself so as not to strain her own body. "You almost did it," Hanabi murmured at her side. Tsunade nodded, agreeing. "Yes, but it's better to try again after our child is born," she stated, thinking that would be best. Hanabi opened a complacent smile, but there was a faint trace of envy there as she looked at Suna's voluminous belly. It wasn't envy in a bad way, just a silent desire.
"Why don't you have a child too?" Suna asked.
Hanabi had been holding herself back for some time, taking herbs and even applying medical jutsu that prevented pregnancy. She didn't want to get pregnant at that moment, and Minato knew the reason.
But while the others seemed not to notice, Tsunade was sensitive enough to see the signs. "I don't want to fall behind. Don't get me wrong, Tsunade.
I want to have a child with Minato, but I'm afraid of delaying my training and falling far behind you," she said with indifference, though there was feeling behind it. Suna pressed her lips together.
Hanabi still carried that sense of inferiority while everyone else was evolving. Kushina had learned to master Kurama mode and fully transform into the fox, launch Baijidama, and increase her proficiency in transformation.
Makoto was learning new jutsu and could already summon her complete Susanoo, over 100 meters tall, capable of cutting mountains. Now Tsuna possessed Mokuton in addition to Sage Mode, her natural strength, and increasingly advanced medical jutsu with the Uzumaki clan's knowledge over the past months.
Hanabi, however, seemed stagnant. Tsunade said nothing. Minato should notice that.
She only hoped he would find a solution for the girl. They had always been side by side since the academy, but now the difference was enormous. Each of them possessed a legendary power, while Hanabi was limited to the level of an elite jonin. Suddenly, an explosion appeared on the horizon, covering an entire mountain. The roar came right after, accompanied by a strong tremor of the earth. Tsunade quickly brought her hands together and made wood sprout from the ground, creating a shield around the two of them. Trees, rocks, and branches were hurled in all directions. It took some time before everything calmed down again. She dispelled the shield and looked ahead.
"What is Kushina thinking, launching almost a Baijidama here?" Suna complained, seeing the fox in front of Minato, standing still, floating in the sky.
"Come on, let's stop this madness and go back home," Tsunade finally said. Hanabi agreed with a nod, and the two headed toward them.
Chapter 350, Our Husband is a Monster. Third-person POV. Unknown location, 43. Minato crossed his arms as he began to listen to Tsuna's lectures in front of Kurama's yellow avatar, with her shouting at Kushina not to keep throwing Baijidama around.
"Don't blame her. I was the one who asked," Minato said, making Tsuna turn her face toward him with some anger.
"Are you crazy? I'm your pregnant wife, and you ask her to launch a Baijidama near you?"
Tsuna shouted, indignant, like a furious woman yelling at her husband after discovering he had spent his entire salary on gambling, which would be funny coming from Tsuna's daughter. "I have several ways to stop a Baijidama, my wife.
I just tried a different one."
"But if, in that case, there was no way to contain it, if it advanced toward you, it wouldn't be a problem to protect you. I am the fastest ninja who has ever existed," Minato said in a serious and confident tone. The tone in Minato's words made the blonde calm down a little.
Kushina laughed. "Don't get so angry, Tsuna. It's not like Minato couldn't handle this.
You're just like this because your hormones are all over the place, with your pregnancy reaching its peak and you about to give birth."
"That's not it.
This has nothing to do with Minato's recklessness,"
Tsuna shouted indignantly, crossing her arms after the outburst. "Calm down, Tsuna. You're only proving what I'm saying," Kushina retorted, still laughing. Kushina began laughing out loud inside the fox's head, while the Senju girl nearly growled, clenching her teeth. "But you should have seen it, Minato." He deflected the Baijidama away from himself using only his hands. "Can you believe it?" Kushina added, making both Tsuna and Hanabi look stunned. "What did you just say?" "With his hands?" Hanabi asked, incredulous. "Wait, Minato. What do you mean you stopped a Baijidama with your hand?" Hanabi asked cautiously. "I didn't stop it. Let's just say I slapped it," Minato replied in a carefree tone. "I used Haki trying to deflect the attack, creating a layer around my arm and delivering a slap strong enough to make the Baijidama change direction when it collided with mine, not being able to get past it."
I didn't block it, but I simply managed to change the course of the attack, like I was swatting a fly. It was a crazy idea he had when he saw his level of hockey. That was one of the reasons he called Kushina to train with him that day.
I can't believe this, Minato. Suna murmured. Minato looked at Kushina. How about we train a little more, he said.
The redhead nodded, then Minato jumped, shooting into the sky before stopping more than 500 meters away in the blink of an eye, his body transformed into light.
He stopped and waited for Kushina, while Suna and Hanabi could still barely believe how things were unfolding.
Kushina, in turn, simply began gathering her Biju's chakra, creating a huge black sphere, the Bijudama itself.
Hey! Are you really doing this like that? Right when we were complaining that you were throwing those?
Suna exclaimed, while Hanabi pulled her along, moving away as the pressure from the Bijudama began to affect even the surrounding environment, destroying the ground and generating a vortex of wind.
The Bijudama was ready in a few seconds and quickly aimed at Minato.
Kushina had complete confidence in her husband and, without letting go of the enormous sphere that was over 20 meters in diameter, simply fired it at him.
Minato did the same thing as before.
He simply remained calm, watching the Bijudama advance toward him in slow motion, as his brain was able to process everything at high speed. His hand became enveloped in armament hockey as he leaned his body to the side, ready to make it veer off course. When it arrived in an instant, he naturally moved his arm at the moment it was about to hit him and began to slap the enormous black sphere, burying his arm into it with force and effecting the attack as if he were pressing into human skin, which recoiled more and more the deeper he drove his hand into the Bijudama. The massive chakra simply deviated from the straight line it had been advancing along downward, but Minato ended up missing this time and it fired off in the wrong direction. It went straight to the ground, where Minato was. He merely thought that, this time, he had missed. The sphere struck the ground and simply exploded near him. He had time to react, but he did nothing. He let the explosion consume the entire area along with him, as he disappeared.
What a healthy bit of fun!
Suna snarled sarcastically as the explosion looked like a mountain in front of them, generating an even larger vortex of wind against them. It's not like I got hurt, Minato's voice sounded near Suna at that moment, as he appeared there with his body covered in several yellow lights, beginning to recover completely as if nothing had happened. That ability, and now that I think about it, I've never seen him injured.
Are you invincible?
Hanabi murmured when she saw him be consumed by the explosion.
However, Minato was as good as new in an instant.
Many of our enemies have said that to me, Minato shrugged.
You talk as if they knew you could even be hit by a Bijudama in the middle of an explosion and come out unscathed.
I bet they'd be so terrified they wouldn't use the word invincible. They'd call you a demon, Suna commented, still in a bad mood over the recklessness of her sister in marriage and her husband.
Minato shrugged and looked at Kushina. Hey, let's continue. I want you to fire countless Bijudamas.
I'll try to defend against all of them, deflecting them using only my hands, Minato said, and Kushina nodded without any problem with that. Minato disappeared once more and reappeared more than 1,000 meters away, closer to the coast. Even so, that wouldn't be a big problem.
What kind of training is this? Suna mocked the new direction things were taking.
She was still excited about the development of the wood style, but watching Minato's training felt like a punch to the stomach.
How could she even compare? She could punch a Biju, but a Bijudama?
She would never be that crazy. It made her question whether all of her powers could really do anything to come close to her husband's strength. Even after almost a year since the war had ended and they had remained rogue ninjas, Minato trained every single day in all kinds of abilities. They sought his skills more than anyone else. They evolved constantly, whether in those unique abilities, in the new Fuinjutsu he developed, or even in his new Sage mode of the Dragon Clan. Then they began to see the fox's mouth open, firing Bijudamas one after another, while Minato simply slapped them away, deflecting them. One thing was using his spacetime technique and teleporting them somewhere else. But slapping them away, that was hard to swallow. The greatest power in the ninja world being treated like a fly in front of that man. Minato continued taking advantage of the fact that Kurama had an immense amount of chakra. He used each fired Baijidama to calculate and control where they would be sent. The forest below him was destroyed along with the beach in the first attacks, but soon the Baijidamas began to be deflected only toward the sea, where they destroyed nothing. That still caused damage to marine life, but it would recover more easily than a destroyed forest, already full of craters created by the first Baijidamas.
Minato decided to try something else.
His body began to transform. His eyes turned golden, horns grew, and scales began to cover his body.
He entered his draconic form. There were some changes since his first transformation.
First, he was no longer 4 meters tall, as he had been the first time. He kept his 1.90 meters and also didn't look as muscular as before, despite his naturally strong body being more athletic than that of a bodybuilder type. His skin became something harder than a Kusanagi sword. Adding his body, already naturally stronger than other people in this world, reinforced by training plus the Draconic Sage mode, Minato simply added Haki and the Iron Body ability.
At the next Baijidama he received, he didn't slap it away.
He simply raised his hand and let the sphere crash against it with full force. Even when he had slapped them before, he was dragged several meters backward by the force of each of Kushina's shots, but this time he didn't move even a centimeter. The Baijidama stopped, trying to push him, but Minato simply held it in his hand. This wasn't like when he had held the 2 Baijidamas he caught frozen in the air before killing the Mizukage in battle. This time, he managed to stop a shot by holding it with his hand, as if it were nothing, while Kushina tried to force it forward.
Minato calmly had all his abilities working in his favor, dealing with it as if it were just a small stone.
The Baijidama continued trying to force its way through, and Minato, maintaining Haki in his dragon form, began using his advanced Haki with his palm held still, sending the shock into the black sphere. The sphere began to crack little by little. He made no sudden movement. He simply started rotating the Haki inside it, triggering an internal explosion. The Baijidama became covered in cracks until it exploded, as if it were nothing. Minato remained there, with the energy dissipating in the middle of the sky, still in his draconic form, with an indifferent look. Kushina, who had stopped attacking the moment she saw Minato simply grab a Baijidama as if it were nothing, stared in shock.
Even Hanabi and Suna were left speechless.
"Tell me what you saw, Hanabi," Suna murmured, while Hanabi kept her Byakugan activated at that moment. She couldn't help but shudder. He simply destroyed Kushina's Bijou chakra. He blocked it with his hand and dissipated all that chaotic energy from the inside out, Hanabi murmured, still stuck on what she had seen through her dojutsu.
That brat, Kurama's voice arose in Kushina's mind, also surprised.
What he just did only shows what I've been thinking ever since I heard about him injuring Shikaku. His punch could even hurt me here, and Shikaku felt it too, despite making more of a fuss. However, no one should be able to hurt us like that. He can not only injure us, he can truly kill us. Kurama herself swallowed hard after realizing that. That Minato was at the peak of his power. Minato disappeared and returned near the girls, saying that for today it was enough and that they would return home. Makoto was holding little 1-month-old Itachi in her arms, nursing him. She smiled when everyone began to enter the house. Kushina appeared excited, going up to poke Itachi's cheeks, while Minato maintained an air of authority and calm, yet couldn't stop smiling with love and tenderness as he saw her with their son. He approached soon after Kushina, but Makoto was surprised when she noticed Suna and Hanabi around them with somewhat discouraged expressions, affecting even the atmosphere around them.
What happened? Makoto asked, while Kushina showered the baby with affection and Minato stepped closer to kiss the Uchiha on the forehead.
"Well, training, you know how it is," Minato replied, shrugging.
"Listen, Makoto," Suna said with her voice somewhat choked and drawn out. "We married a monster." Minato shrugged at Makoto's questioning look. Minato only managed to improve their mood when he prepared dinner. Which was simple.
"I was looking forward to eating your food again, husband,"
Hanabi said, laughing.
She had lost a good part of her initial shyness and ended up becoming more cheerful and spontaneous. "I hope to see this more often." Deal, Minato replied, preparing homemade ramen, something he missed, since the Uzumaki clan didn't have much of that there. He had needed to slip away from the floating island to get the ingredients in some cities below them. Tomorrow I'm going out alone, Minato declared, sitting at the table and talking about it so casually that it made everyone look at him.
Wait, we have a date. You promised, Kushina said immediately.
We can leave the date for the following day, Minato opened a small smile.
I want to do something tomorrow and I'll have to do it alone.
No one will be able to come with me, since where I intend to go can't be reached with my teleportation jutsu, Minato said, making everyone stand up, curious.
And where do you intend to go? Mikoto murmured, curious.
Minato simply pointed upward, to the ceiling.
Tomorrow is a full moon. I've been planning this for 3 weeks.
Tomorrow, I intend to go to the moon, he declared. Of all the girls he had helped, Hanabi was the one who had gained the least from him in terms of power. She had learned the bow and arrow style and long-range attacks thanks to him, which was good at first, but now, with everyone above a certain level, that was no longer enough.
Minato didn't want to leave her behind.
Because of that, he had a clear idea, to make her be a Kugan transform into the Tensigan. That wraps up this part of What If Transmigrated as Minato Namikaze.
Thanks so much for listening.
As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released 1 day ahead of YouTube. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well.
See you in the next one.